I moved your inheritance into my name, starting fresh with someone younger who actually appreciates me." That was the first thing Greg said. No hello, no pause. Just those words laced with smugness and broadcast through my phone like an announcement of war. His voice was crackling through what sounded like a speakerphone with wind and waves and clinking glasses in the background. A beach resort, no doubt. Somewhere far from rainy Portland, Oregon, where I sat in our kitchen, alone listening to my 22-year marriage implode. Then came that laugh, that condescending, cruel little laugh that used to make me flinch, but now only made my grip on the wine glass tighten. I stared out at the rain streaking down the window, cool and steady, as if the sky itself was sighing with me. "You really should have paid more attention to your accounts, sweetheart." The last word twisted like a knife, but I didn't flinch, not this time. My voice when it came was calm, steady, stone. "You're right," I whispered. "You deserve it." And then I hung up. My name is Danielle Foster, and I'm 45 years old. I've been a senior accountant at Hollowgate Systems for over a decade. Methodical, predictable, quiet. People assume I'm soft because I don't raise my voice, but they forget that silence can be strategic. I set my wine down and looked at the laptop still glowing on the kitchen table. The banking portal was open, frozen on the balance Greg had tried and failed to move. $600,000 plus the title to a secluded mountain cabin, all left to me by Uncle Theodore, the only family member who truly saw me. The only one who knew that being the quiet one doesn't mean you're weak. What Greg didn't know, what he never bothered to ask, was that Uncle Theo was a man who'd been burned, a man who lost everything once to someone he trusted and spent the next 30 years building wealth and safeguards. When he died 18 months ago, he left me not just money but a system, a plan, a legacy of protection from predators, including charming golf-obsessed husbands with expensive wardrobes and younger girlfriends named Amber. I'd followed his instructions to the letter. That same Greg who had blown through his own savings chasing motorcycle dreams and restaurant investments he didn't understand, now thought he could just reroute my inheritance like he was transferring airline miles. He had no idea how wrong he was. The phone rang again. Greg. I let it go to voicemail. Let him sit with his own audacity for a while. Outside, the drizzle thickened. The city was gray and quiet, just the way I liked it. For the first time in years, I let a small smile play across my lips. Not joy exactly, but something closer to satisfaction. He had no idea what he'd triggered. Growing up, I was always the responsible one. The girl with the spreadsheets while others danced at prom, the planner, the fixer. It's what drew me to Greg in the first place. His reckless ambition had a kind of magnetism I mistook for drive. I thought we'd build something together. A business, a family, a future. Instead, I built a safety net and Greg built lies. Through every failed venture, his short-lived construction firm, the cafe disaster, the crypto debacle, I picked up the pieces in silence. He mistook that silence for compliance. He never realized it was strategy. When Uncle Theo died, I mourned him with my entire being, not just because he was kind, but because he understood. He used to tell me, Danielle, protect what you build, even from the people who say they love you. I thought he was being paranoid. Turns out he was being brilliant. He left me not just a fortune, but a blueprint. I'd spent weeks meeting with his advisor, Patricia Wells, a sharp woman who didn't blink twice when I told her I wanted full asset protection. We structured the funds through Gravora Group Private Banking, a firm known for absolute discretion. Passwords were the beginning. There were biometric locks, fraud alerts, authorization protocols, and a clause that would revoke all spousal claims if fraud was detected. Greg's name wasn't on a single document. The money he'd tried to transfer, it wasn't even in the account he thought it was in. I'd left a small amount in our joint account for appearances. The rest was fortified behind a firewall of legal armor. And he He'd just kicked that firewall with his bare feet. By the time he made that call, the fraud alert had already triggered. The systems were in motion. Every attempt he made would be documented, flagged, traceable. And I hadn't said a word until now. I poured another glass of wine and opened a new document on my computer. To-do list, I typed. Call Jennifer Patterson, divorce attorney. Notify Patricia at Gravora to prepare logs. Forward Greg's voicemail and number to legal folder. Find my old PI's contact info. Cancel Greg's access to utilities and joint subscriptions. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I wasn't crying, I wasn't shaking. In fact, for the first time in years, I felt awake, alive, in control. Let him think he'd won. Let him sip his margarita next to his 28-year-old bartender-turned-girlfriend and laugh about how he'd outsmarted his boring accountant wife. Because the next time he checked his account balance, it wouldn't be 6 figures waiting for him. It would be a freeze notice, and maybe a federal investigation. Greg Foster had just made the biggest mistake of his life, and he didn't even know it yet. Before I could go forward, I had to rewind to the years when the cracks began forming beneath the surface, silent and invisible, like hairline fractures in a porcelain vase. Greg and I met at the University of Oregon. I was 22, fresh-faced, and obsessed with balance sheets and budget modeling. He was 24, a business major with a dazzling smile and a way of speaking that made you believe he'd already made his first million. I was drawn to his energy. He called me grounding. I thought we'd be unstoppable together, a dreamer and a doer. And for a while, we were. We got married in a tiny ceremony under the fall leaves at Silver Falls. No debt, just vows and hope. We moved into a modest apartment in Beaverton, and I started my first real accounting job while Greg bounced from one business idea to another. The first was a custom furniture startup. 6 months later, we were left with unsold inventory, a pile of unpaid vendor bills, and a garage that smelled like varnish for a year. Then came the craft beer bar, then a wellness cafe, then crypto. Each time I cleaned up the mess, I filed the taxes. I negotiated with creditors. I pulled from savings to make sure the mortgage got paid. I made excuses at family dinners when he didn't show up or had a new partner in the works. I learned to absorb the disappointment without letting it leak out of me. I didn't complain, not because I was weak, but because I was calculating. I knew I had to wait for the right moment, the right leverage to make a move that would stick. Greg mistook that for passivity, but he never understood the long game. The shift came when Uncle Theodore passed away last year. I hadn't seen Greg cry at the funeral, not once, but I cried for both of us for the man who'd been a second father to me, and for the loss of the only person who ever gave me unfiltered financial advice without judgment. He'd been quiet and intense, with the kind of eyes that saw 3 steps ahead. His first fortune vanished when he was 35, taken by a charming friend who rerouted company assets and left him with IRS debt and a reputation in tatters. It took Uncle Theodore nearly 20 years to rebuild, but he didn't rebuild with vengeance, he rebuilt with systems. He often said paranoia is just experience with a longer memory. I used to roll my eyes at that, but now I realize it was wisdom written in scars. He left me $600,000 in assets and the deed to a cabin near Mount Hood, but that wasn't the real gift. The real gift was a binder he called the Fortress File. In it were his instructions: create layers, use blind trusts, separate all inherited assets from marital ones, never put both names on anything, vet your advisors like you'd vet a heart surgeon, and most of all, if someone ever tries to take what isn't theirs, let them hang themselves with their own rope. So I did exactly that. Within weeks, I was meeting quietly with Patricia Wells, a partner at Gravora Group Private Banking. Patricia had a reputation for turning inheritances into fortified kingdoms. Together, we set up 2 irrevocable trusts, one for the cabin and one for the cash. We routed the funds through multiple shell accounts that only I controlled. It wasn't about hiding, it was about protecting. The kicker. We built in an automatic revocation clause. If anyone, Greg included, tried to access the funds illegally, it would immediately revoke any shared claims they had to any of our assets. It wasn't just smart, it was bulletproof. Greg, meanwhile, was on a networking tour. That's what he called it. A series of weekend golf trips and overnight stays in cities where he claimed he was meeting potential partners. But I wasn't blind. He was dressing younger, spending more, making cryptic comments about feeling boxed in and ready for something fresh. He stopped asking how my day was, but he did start asking about the inheritance. At first, it was casual jokes about our mountain cabin and whether we could invest some of the money into a new venture. I deflected, gave vague answers, watched his tone shift over time from curiosity to entitlement. That's when I knew he was planning something. So I set the first trap. One morning, I left a fake bank statement on my desk just carelessly enough for him to spot. It showed a balance of $127,000 in an account that didn't exist. Sure enough, within a week, I caught him taking a photo of it through the reflection in my laptop screen. I didn't confront him. I just made a note. Then I hired a private investigator. For weeks, I said nothing while the PI tracked Greg's movements. He wasn't networking. He was spending long weekends in Phoenix with a woman named Amber, a bartender with a social media feed full of poolside selfies and diamond earrings. The same diamond earrings that showed up on Greg's credit card bill. The lies weren't just emotional, they were financial. And in my world, that's even worse. So I began building my evidence folder, screenshots, receipts, surveillance photos, texts, a paper trail so clean even the IRS would weep with gratitude. And then, on a rainy Thursday morning, Greg made his move. He called Gravora, pretending to be my financial advisor, claimed he needed access to my accounts, asked for passwords. When that didn't work, he tried again, this time in person. What he didn't know was that every call was logged, every attempt was documented, every IP address flagged. And when he finally tried to initiate the transfer, thinking he'd finally cracked my secret stash, the system locked down. His voice on the phone that afternoon, the one where he told me he'd move my money, wasn't confidence. It was delusion. He genuinely believed he'd won. But the moment he clicked transfer, he triggered three things: an automatic fraud lock on the account, a federal suspicious activity report filed with his name attached, the revocation clause that stripped him of his rights to our home, our shared accounts, and my retirement funds. And I poured a glass of wine and watched the rain fall. The next morning, just as I was finishing my first cup of coffee, Greg called again. This time his tone was different. There was no smugness, no swagger, just fear raw and cracking through the phone line. "Danielle, what the hell is going on? I tried to transfer the money yesterday and now the bank's saying there's some kind of investigation. They froze everything." I took a long sip of my coffee. The morning drizzle outside continued its gentle rhythm against the kitchen window. I hadn't slept that well in months. "Good morning to you too, Greg," I said calmly. "How's your golf trip going?" "Cut the crap." "What did you do?" I smiled into my cup, the warmth of the Colombian roast grounding me in the moment. I didn't do anything. But apparently, you tried to commit bank fraud. That tends to trigger automatic security protocols. There was silence on the line long enough for me to wonder if he'd hung up. Then I heard him again breathing hard. "I'm your husband. I have rights to that money. Actually, you don't." I stood and walked to the window, watching the mist roll in over the hills beyond our backyard. Uncle Theodore's inheritance was placed in a protected trust, Greg, specifically designed to prevent unauthorized access. You tried to move funds without permission. That's fraud. You're lying. Married couples share assets automatically, not inherited assets placed in trust, especially not when the trust is written to protect the beneficiary from opportunists. That last word landed like a stone in a still pond. The bank considers your attempted transfer identity theft an attempted grand larceny. The line was quiet again. Then I heard it, her laughter. That same soft, syrupy giggle I'd heard in the background of Greg's call the day before. Amber. She had no idea she was cuddled up next to a man who had just tripped every wire in a financial fortress. A man who had no money, no access, and no plan. "Danielle, you need to fix this. Call the bank and tell them you authorized the transfer." I walked back to the table and sat down. Why would I do that? Because we're married. Because you love me. No, Greg. You called yesterday to tell me you were leaving me for someone younger. You lied about this golf trip. You tried to steal my inheritance and ride off into the sunset. I let that hang in the air. He exhaled shakily. I can explain everything. I'm sure you can, I said flatly, but I'm not interested in hearing it. My lawyer will be in touch. You can't do this. That money belongs to both of us. No, I interrupted, voice ice cold. It really doesn't. And thanks to your little stunt yesterday, you've just made my divorce attorney's job incredibly easy. And then I hung up. I turned off my phone and exhaled. The tension didn't vanish, but it morphed into something sharper, focused, clear. Today was going to be a very productive day. By 9 a.m., I was sitting in the sleek downtown office of Patterson & Associates. I'd consulted them 3 months ago quietly when Greg's behavior had first changed. My attorney, Jennifer Patterson, was a seasoned divorce specialist with a keen eye for financial misconduct. Danielle, I have to say this is one of the cleaner cases I've seen in years, Jennifer said, flipping through the evidence folder I'd handed her. Your husband essentially gift-wrapped his own downfall. I'd come prepared. Screenshots of his credit card activity over the past 6 months, multiple charges at out-of-town hotels, dinner reservations for 2 jewelry receipts. I had banking records showing attempted transfers from our joint account. I even brought time-stamped logs of failed access attempts at Gravora. Jennifer tapped her pen against the folder. What I don't understand is how he thought he could access a protected trust without the authorization codes. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a series of old text messages. He's been asking for my passwords for months, claimed he wanted to help manage finances. I gave vague answers, but I think he was watching me when I logged in. Truthfully, I knew he was watching. That's why I'd baited him. The fake bank statement left accidentally on my desk had been printed on Gravora-branded paper but listed a non-existent account. He'd taken the bait. I saw him through the reflection in my monitor snapping a photo of the document like he was in some low-rent spy movie. He had the wrong account number, the wrong bank, the wrong everything, and that's exactly how I wanted it. There's something else, I added, pulling another document from my folder. Greg's been slowly draining our joint account. Nothing dramatic, but over time it added up to nearly $15,000. Jennifer's eyebrows shot up. Where was it going? A bank account I didn't recognize. I had a private investigator trace it last month. It's under his name only. He used it to pay for his affair hotel rooms, flights, expensive meals, even a spa weekend. I handed her another envelope, photos of Greg and Amber in Phoenix, receipts, video stills. Jennifer flipped through them, visibly impressed. Danielle, this is outstanding. With this kind of documentation, we can file on grounds of adultery and financial misconduct. And thanks to the failed inheritance transfer, we've got attempted fraud on record. He has zero footing. I leaned forward. There's more. I explained the revocation clause, the one Theodore had insisted we include. If Greg ever tried to claim or transfer funds from the trust illegally, he would automatically forfeit any claim to shared marital assets. Jennifer sat back in her chair and let out a low whistle. So the moment he tried to move the money, everything else legally became mine. She shook her head amazed. Your uncle was a genius, he was, I said, my voice softening, and he warned me. Not just about Greg, but about people who think loyalty is weakness. At 11 a.m., just as I was leaving Jennifer's office, my phone rang. Patricia Wells from Gravora. Mr. Foster has been calling our offices repeatedly since 8 this morning. She said, her voice calm, but with a trace of amusement. He seems to believe he can resolve the situation by speaking to a supervisor, and we've informed him that any attempted unauthorized access to protected accounts is automatically escalated to federal banking authorities. His Social Security number has been flagged in our system. Any future attempts will trigger immediate law enforcement notifications. I laughed softly. Patricia, that's even better than I expected. She wasn't done. There's something else. We reviewed prior activity. Mr. Foster made several calls in February claiming to be your financial advisor. He also visited one of our branches in person and attempted to request account information under false pretenses. My grip tightened on the phone. He did what we flagged it as suspicious at the time, but now, in light of recent events, it demonstrates a clear pattern of premeditation. We've logged every incident. I'll have documentation sent to your attorney within the hour. Greg hadn't just made a mistake. He'd built a case against himself brick by brick. By the time I returned to my office at Hollowgate Systems that afternoon, I'd already forwarded Patricia's full documentation to Jennifer. I walked through the sleek glass doors with my head held high, not to make a scene, but because I refused to shrink anymore. No one at work knew what was unfolding behind the scenes, and I planned to keep it that way. But that plan didn't last long. Just before lunch, my supervisor, David Walsh, knocked gently on my office door. His expression was somewhere between curious and concerned. "Danielle, there are 2 people here to see you. They say they're with federal banking enforcement." I felt my heart hiccup, but I nodded. "Send them in, please." 2 agents stepped into my office. A woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense air, and a younger man with a sharp haircut and government-issued blandness. They introduced themselves as Agent Martinez and Agent Thompson and handed me their credentials. "Mrs. Foster, we're investigating suspicious activity related to your inheritance." Trust Agent Martinez began settling into the chair across from my desk. "Your banking institution has flagged multiple attempted unauthorized transfers, one of which occurred yesterday. We understand your husband Gregory Foster may have been involved." I closed my laptop and gave them my full attention. "That's correct," I said. "He called me from what he claimed was a golf trip, laughing, saying he'd move my inheritance into his name. I knew immediately it wasn't possible, but he was very confident." Agent Thompson was scribbling notes. "Have there been prior incidents where your husband tried to access your accounts?" "Not that I was aware of until Patricia from Gravora told me this morning. He's been making calls for months, claimed to be my financial advisor, even visited a branch." Agent Martinez nodded. "We've received those logs." There was a pause. "Mrs. Foster, we need to inform you that this isn't simply a civil matter. Attempting to gain unauthorized access to federally protected financial trusts can constitute bank fraud, identity theft, and financial impersonation, all federal offenses." I nodded. I assumed as much. Agent Thompson looked up from his notebook. "If proven, the penalties could include up to 20 years in federal prison, especially given the evidence of premeditation." I felt the weight of it settle in the air like dust. 20 years. 20 years of freedom traded for lies and a woman named Amber, who probably thought she'd hit the jackpot. "Do you have evidence of communication?" Martinez asked. "Yes. Voicemails, texts, screenshots. And a private investigator tracked Greg's movements for the past 6 weeks. He was in Phoenix last weekend, not at a golf resort." Martinez handed me a card. "We'll need you to come in and make a formal statement. Bring all materials. The bank is cooperating. And your documentation will help solidify the case." As they left, I stood at the window and stared out at the gray Portland skyline. My reflection stared back, calm, composed, and unrecognizable, from the woman who used to sit here, wondering why her husband had become a stranger. I was no longer waiting for things to get better. I was making them better, one cold, calculated step at a time. My phone buzzed again. Greg. I stared at the screen before answering. I didn't speak, just let the silence stretch. "Danielle, please," he blurted. "There are agents asking questions. They called me this morning. This has gone too far, has it?" He inhaled sharply. "I made a mistake, okay. I got scared about the future, about money, about you leaving. But we can fix this. We always fix things right." I walked to the bookshelf and traced my fingers along the edge of a framed photo from our early years, young hopeful standing outside that first little apartment in Beaverton. "We can't fix this, Greg, because this wasn't a mistake. You planned this. You opened secret accounts. You lied. You stole. You watched me enter passwords when I thought you were asleep. And then you tried to commit bank fraud." His voice cracked. "I didn't know it was that serious. You tried to take something that wasn't yours. That's theft. You weren't just leaving me. You were robbing me." A pause. Then, like a last-ditch, Hail Mary. "What do you want from me? What will it take to make this go away?" I closed my eyes. Let the question sit there heavy and trembling. "Nothing," I said. "There's nothing you can do to make this go away. You did this to yourself." And then I ended the call. I went to lunch, ate a chicken Caesar wrap from the cafe downstairs while reviewing invoices. I pretended like it was just another Thursday, because that's how you win with men like Greg, not by yelling, not by crying, but by showing up, calm, clear, and unshakable. 3 days later, as I was seasoning vegetables at home for dinner, Agent Martinez called again. "Mrs. Foster, I wanted to inform you that we've taken your husband into custody." I set down my wooden spoon. "Where, Phoenix?" He was attempting to board a flight to Costa Rica with his companion when TSA flagged his passport. He was detained at the gate. My breath caught for half a second. "He was running," yes, Martinez said. "And given the circumstances, his attempt to flee may further support charges of consciousness of guilt." After hanging up, I stood at my kitchen window and sipped a glass of wine while the vegetables roasted. The world outside was misty and still, and for the first time in years, so was I. That night I called Jennifer. She laughed, practically giddy. "That's it. This speeds up everything. A spouse in federal custody for financial crimes. He won't touch your assets. He won't even get visitation rights for the dog." We both laughed. It wasn't just relief, it was closure poured into every line of that conversation. The next morning, I received a new voicemail from Amber. "This is Amber. I don't know what the hell you told the feds, but Greg is a good man. You're just bitter and jealous. He's never been happier than he is with me." I played it twice, then typed a reply. "Tell Greg that when he's arraigned for bank fraud, he'll have plenty of time to reflect on how happy you make him." Seconds later, another reply. "Wait. What arraignment?" I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the voicemail to Jennifer with a note ongoing contact from affair partner, additional documentation of infidelity. Then I turned off my phone, packed my briefcase, and headed to the office. Greg had spent months trying to orchestrate a betrayal, but he'd never realized he was just playing a role in a play Uncle Theodore had written a long, long time ago. The day Greg was formally charged felt eerily mundane. I was at work reconciling invoices when my phone buzzed with an email from Jennifer Patterson. Subject update. Greg Foster criminal case body. Greg was arraigned this morning. Bail denied. Charges include attempted bank fraud, identity theft, and misrepresentation of fiduciary access. Attached copy of formal complaint and hearing schedule. I didn't cry, I didn't cheer. I simply saved the documents to my legal folder, took a sip of lukewarm coffee, and kept typing. A few hours later, the news broke publicly. Local press reported the arrest of a Portland man detained in Phoenix for attempting to flee the country while under federal investigation. No names were listed initially, but those who knew us. My sister Catherine, a few old friends from college put two and two together. By evening, my voicemail was full. The first message was from Amber, angry, sputtering, incoherent. "This is all your fault. You're destroying a good man because you're bitter because he found someone who actually loves him." The second message was shorter. "You win. Is that what you wanted?" And the third caught me off guard. "Please. He's scared. They took his passport. They're saying prison. I didn't sign up for this." Amber's tone had shifted from smug to shaken, and for a second I felt something unexpected pity. But then I remembered the sound of her laughter in the background of that first call, the glee in her voice when she thought she'd won. She hadn't. Greg hadn't either. They'd gambled on a lie and lost to something they never understood: preparation. The next morning, I was making coffee when the doorbell rang. A courier stood outside holding a thick envelope from Gravora Group Private Banking. Inside were new account credentials, security logs, and a handwritten note from Patricia Wells. all security protocols have been reset. Your inheritance remains fully protected and has continued accruing interest during this period. Your uncle would be proud." I stared at the words for a long moment. Uncle Theodore hadn't just left me wealth. He'd left me a shield, a map, a playbook for navigating betrayal with grace and power. 6 weeks later, I stood in Multnomah County Court facing a monitor where Greg appeared via video feed in a tan detention-issued jumpsuit. His hair was unkempt, his voice was hollow. He didn't speak during the hearing, not even once. Jennifer laid out everything with ruthless clarity: the fraudulent access attempts, the stolen joint funds, the infidelity, the premeditated impersonation of a fiduciary. "Your Honor," she said, her voice sharp as a scalpel, "the defendant not only betrayed the trust of a 22-year marriage, he attempted to weaponize that trust for financial gain. He forfeited his right to any marital assets the moment he engaged in criminal conduct." The Judge Hanen, Marlene Morrison, a stern woman in her 60s, nodded solemnly as she reviewed the evidence. "I have reviewed the revocation clause in the trust documentation," she said, tapping her gavel lightly. "As of the date of attempted fraud, Mr. Foster legally forfeited all claim to marital property. This divorce is granted with prejudice. All financial arrangements are final and non-negotiable." And just like that, it was done. I walked out of the courthouse with the finalized decree in one hand and my purse in the other. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Catherine saw the news about Greg's sentencing. 28 months in federal prison. "You okay?" I smiled. Never been better. That afternoon, I met with Patricia again. We sat across from each other in the private client wing of Gravora Group, sipping peppermint tea and reviewing portfolio updates. The trust had grown by another 4% during the legal storm. The cabin had appreciated in value thanks to a new hiking trail expansion nearby. And combined with my share of our former joint savings and untouched retirement account, I was now in a position I'd never imagined, free liquid and fully self-determined. But that wasn't what moved me most. What moved me was the envelope Patricia slid across the table, cream-colored with a familiar signature on the seal. "I almost forgot," she said. "Your uncle left this with me. He said to deliver it once all legal matters were resolved." My hands trembled slightly as I broke the wax. Inside was a letter. Short, precise. Pure, Theodore. Danielle. If you're reading this, it means someone tried to take what wasn't theirs. I hope my preparations helped. But more than that, I hope you remember what matters most. Peace of mind. Build something beautiful with what remains. T. I blinked hard, folded the letter, and tucked it into my purse. Build something beautiful. He didn't mean just a business. He meant a life. In the weeks that followed, I took a break from work. Not to escape, but to build. I'd seen too many women over the years stuck in situations like mine, financially dependent on men who didn't respect them, too afraid to plan for independence. So I began sketching out an idea, a financial literacy nonprofit focused on helping women quietly, discreetly build financial defenses. Inheritance protection, divorce preparation, legal awareness, the Fortress Fund. It started as a quiet blog with a downloadable checklist. Then women started emailing, then sharing, then asking for workshops. Uncle Theodore's legacy was evolving, becoming something bigger than both of us. And me, I didn't retire. I didn't run off to the mountains. I stayed in Portland, kept working part-time, kept showing up with my head held high. And every time someone asked how I was doing, I'd smile and say, better than ever. Because it wasn't just about what Greg took. It was about what he couldn't take. It's strange, really, how quickly the silence can become your sanctuary when the chaos ends. There's no more stomping boots on hardwood floors, no slamming doors late at night, no urgent business trips with golf bags and too much cologne, no passive-aggressive questions about grocery budgets or subtle jabs about how accountants don't understand risk. Just peace. The kind of peace that doesn't scream for attention but settles into your bones like warmth. I sat on the back deck of my home one cool Saturday morning, cradling a mug of coffee, watching as the sun threaded itself through the Portland clouds. It had been almost 2 months since the court finalized my divorce, 38 days since Greg was sentenced to 28 months in federal prison, and just 5 since the Fortress Fund launched its official nonprofit status. In that time, something inside me had shifted, not broken, not hardened, but sharpened. I used to think being the quiet one meant I had to accept less. That discretion was the same as submission. That being the rock meant you let the waves crash into you without complaint. But Uncle Theodore was right. The real wealth isn't in your account balance. It's in knowing that you're untouchable, not because no one tries, but because they fail. I glanced at the cabin deed that now sat framed in my study. Mount Hood, untouched and waiting. My little retreat. A few weeks earlier, Patricia Wells had called with more good news. The trust had surpassed its 5-year growth benchmark. Interest investments and value appreciation had turned the original $600,000 into nearly $710,000, and the cabin estimated at $400,000. Combined with my untouched retirement savings and the car Greg once mocked me for keeping for too long, I was comfortably set for the rest of my life. And yet I didn't feel like retreating. Not yet. Instead, I felt called to something else. I kept thinking about the emails that came flooding into the Fortress Fund's inbox, women of all ages writing from across the country. My husband starting to ask for passwords. Is that a red flag? My sister-in-law keeps asking if my trust is family shareable. I think my ex is planning to drain our joint account. What do I do? Each message was a mirror to a moment I'd lived and survived, so I answered them, one by one, late at night, between client audits, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with wine, but always with empathy and sharpness, and always with the reminder, you're not weak, you're just unarmed, but not anymore. Last week, I stood on a small stage at a women's networking event in downtown Portland, delivering a speech titled, "When Silence is Strategy, Protecting Yourself Financially Before It's Too Late." The room was packed. I didn't tell them all the details. I didn't need to. But I did tell them what mattered, how wealth can be stolen quietly, how the most dangerous betrayal comes with a smile, and how preparation is not paranoia, it's self-respect. Afterward, a woman approached me, maybe late 30s, tight smile, tired eyes. "You're not just telling my story," she whispered. "You're showing me how it ends." I squeezed her hand gently. "No," I said. "I'm showing you how it begins." Sometimes at night, I reread the letter from Uncle Theodore. Build something beautiful with what remains. He didn't mean a revenge plan. He meant a legacy, something enduring. Something clean and brave and real. The betrayal was never the end. It was the catalyst. Greg tried to erase me from my own life. He thought his charm and timing could outwit my planning, that he could fly to paradise with a girl who didn't even know his middle name and ride off with money he didn't earn. He was wrong. Because while he was planning his escape, I was building a firewall of legal precision and quiet resolve. While he lied, I documented. While he drifted away, I watched and waited. And when he made his move, I didn't yell. I didn't panic. I simply stepped forward into the fortress I'd built, one line of code, one clause, one cautionary conversation at a time. And now I get to choose everything. Where I live, who I help, how I spend my mornings, whether I ever let another person back into the most sacred parts of my life. That's real freedom. That's peace of mind. That's the true inheritance. Final reflection. So if you've ever been underestimated by someone who swore they loved you, if you've ever been made to feel less than because you were careful, cautious, or calm, if you've ever been left picking up pieces, someone else shattered, let me tell you something. The quiet ones. We don't break. We build. And when the time is right, we rise. On our own terms. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely and turned that pain into power? Share your story in the comments. And if you found strength in this journey, hit that like, subscribe, and join us as we share more true stories of betrayal turned into rebirth. You're not alone. You're just getting started.